So the BBC has once again proven me right. This taxpayer funded propaganda outlet has indeed gone rogue, as I said yesterday. I didn't have to wait for long, and one of its presenters has just proven me right. Her name is Martine Croxall. Martine Croxall of the BBC was interviewing Palestinian ambassador Husam Zomlot on the fourth round of exchange of Israeli captives. Because she was interviewing a Palestinian guest, she had her aggression back. So much so that she was determined to go on the offensive, even on the issue of Hamas releasing Israeli captives in a more orderly fashion. This was simply unacceptable to her, as it seemed. Just watch her animated response when the Palestinian guest said that it didn't matter whether crowds were there or not during the release.
With us now is Husam Zomlot, who is the head of the Palestinian mission to the United Kingdom. Thank you very much for joining us here in the studio. How is it that today has been more orderly than the chaotic scenes that we saw on Thursday when we saw the last exchange and release?
The scenes is not what matters. What matters is that
Well, it does.
exchange.
Sorry, Mrs. Zomlot, you know that it matters, and you believe that something has changed in the last few days.
The important thing is that these captives are being released. There is an exchange, and we in the Palestinian side see hundreds of Palestinian captives. Most of them have been behind bars for decades. Some of them almost 40 years. I mean, this is the longest serving captives, political prisoners, between parentheses, on earth in history. And therefore, of course, it's a sense of relief that such a process is taking place and people are seeing their freedom finally after all these years and decades. But the real scenes that shocked me and the world is the state of affair, is the state of health of the Palestinian captives.
This is what the BBC's so-called journalism has been reduced to these days. I'm sure she will mention this in her CV to demonstrate her high impact journalism. Credit to the Palestinian ambassador, by the way, for keeping his cool. If I was there, this would have been enough provocation to put her in her place. But that's why the BBC would never invite me on any of its program. Anyway, Husam Zomlot didn't waste any time before exposing the BBC's journalistic fraud by reminding her that it's been disingenuous in describing Israeli captives as hostages, but Palestinian hostages as prisoners.
It's very hard,
Unprecedented.
but it's very hard, isn't it?
I know some of them.
It's very hard to state that, and other people who've commented and said they've dismissed what's happened to the Israeli hostages. That they've come out and they look healthy and they're perfectly fine.
Yes.
Those two things can coexist, can they not? That both sets of.
Can you compare between the state of health of the Israeli captives? And please, Martin, we need to agree on the terminology here. You call the Israeli side hostages, and you call our side, the Palestinians, prisoners. And this is even against the international.
Some of them were kept in jails as opposed to prisons, weren't they? When there is an important distinction.
Please invite an international law expert next time and ask him. In such a situation, when combatants, active combatants, are taking, what are they described? They will tell you they will be described as captives, or at best, prisoners of war. And the Palestinian people, when they are described as prisoners, it gives the impression that those are criminals who have been convicted in a court, which is not the case. Let me give you one example.
Talk to us about the proportions then, because some have not been convicted of anything, have they?
Most of them, actually. I'll tell you the proportions. Israel, since its military occupation of the occupied territory, the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, has detained 800,000 Palestinians. 800,000. That is more than 20% of the entire population and almost half of the male population.
Of course, this BBC woman didn't like that. But the Palestinian guest ought to have reminded the BBC presenter about the ICJ ruling declaring Israeli occupation of Palestinian territories as illegal. Why is that important? Because, first of all, it doesn't get bigger than that. The world's highest court has told the United Nations General Assembly that Israel had illegally occupied the Palestinian territories. And the people resisting against the illegal occupation are not called prisoners under international law. But BBC and facts don't go hand in hand. How else would you then serve the interest of Israel in the guise of journalism? Oh, did I tell you that this Martine Croxall woman also had a meltdown when the Palestinian guest reminded her about another ICJ ruling declaring Israeli atrocities in Gaza as plausible genocide? She had the audacity to defend Israel even here.
When a state, and it's Israel in this case, feels under threat from some people who don't even believe that that nation has a right to defend itself, isn't it understandable that they round people up when they feel threatened by those people?
You know how many people they have
Is that
rounded?
it? I mean, it's a question.
You know, this whole issue of right of self-defense has allowed Israel to inflict the mass murder and mass destruction, what the ICJ now describe as plausible genocide. This is not an act of
you know what I'm going to have to say. I'm going to say Israel denies that. They say that they were in pursuit of Hamas terrorists who hid behind their own people.
And that's how you do it? That's how Britain did it when there were issues in Northern Ireland? You went and bombed Belfast? You killed 60,000 people, innocent people? What is this logic? Israel has been behaving in a thuggish manner above international legality, and the international media has been giving it all the cover to actually quit the responsibility. I mean, look at the terminology. Look how we describe things. Of course, there are issues, but you go and arrest children. You know, as we speak now, after the release and the exchange, we have more than 400 Palestinian children in Israeli prisons.
I can understand why she would present the Israeli side if this is what Husam Zomlot alleged, even though the BBC never present the Palestinian side while interviewing Israeli guests. But to counter her guest, when all he is doing is quoting the world's highest court, is not journalism and is utterly shameful. There's nothing new with Martine Croxall losing her cool on the mere mention of genocide by a Palestinian guest. This is how she had reacted while interviewing a Palestinian journalist in August last year.
I just must go back to a word that you used a moment ago. It is a fact that many international members of the international community regard these settlements as illegal. But you just used the word genocide. Is that in relation to what's happening in the West Bank? Are you really using that word?
So I'm speaking about the genocide that is happening in Gaza. Now, what is happening in Palestine, and you need to remember, Gaza is not a separate entity from Palestine, which seems to be the trend in media. Israel is enforcing spatiocide, and that includes the annexation of territory and the depopulation of villages. In the West Bank, we have witnessed an unprecedented rate of Israeli settler annexation of Palestinian lands and actual depopulation of towns and areas within the West Bank. So that does fall within the overall Israeli strategy of ethnic cleansing. And if that word makes you uncomfortable, I recommend that you go and actually see what ethnic cleansing means, because Israel has de facto implemented every part of what that phrase entails.
Well, of course,
so yes, I do place it in that same category.
Well, of course, Israel would deny that completely, and even members of the international community would challenge some of what you've just said.
Thanks to these BBC presenters that we now know that even a North Korean TV channel would be more credible than this British public broadcaster. Look, I'd have no problem if this propaganda outlet didn't extort money from gullible British taxpayers to run its pro-Zionist propaganda. But until it stopped asking the British public to pay for its propaganda, I will have no option but to continue exposing its dirty design. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you too think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. The details are there in the description of this video. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.